After that moment at the bank, the laughter disappeared instantly. Inside First National Heritage Bank, everything kept moving as if nothing had happened. The marble floors still reflected the ceiling lights with cold perfection. Heels clicked across the lobby in steady rhythms. The money-counting machines whispered their endless numbers behind the counters. Pens scratched paper. Screens refreshed. Business continued, but something invisible had cracked. The air felt thinner, stretched tight, like a room holding its breath. The echoes of laughter were gone, yet their absence felt louder than the sound itself. No one mentioned it. No one needed to. The space where it had lived now felt heavy, uncomfortable, almost accusatory. A woman adjusted her scarf too many times while waiting in line. A man pretended to read his phone, scrolling without seeing. The tellers smiled, but their smiles were stiff, practiced, slightly delayed. The bank looked the same, but it no longer felt clean. Outside, beyond the glass doors, the November wind swept across the parking lot. Wesley Brooks sat alone on a stone bench near the edge of the lot, far from the entrance. His feet barely touched the ground. The cracked soles of his worn sneakers hung just above the pavement, the laces frayed and uneven. One shoe had a strip of peeling tape along the side, trying and failing to hold the leather together. His phone lay in his lap, the screen split by a jagged crack that caught the light every time he moved. Notifications blinked and disappeared, unread. He did not touch it. In his hands was a brown envelope, bent at the corners, softened from being held too tightly. Inside it, folded and unfolded too many times, was a letter. Grandma Eleanor Brooks' handwriting shook slightly across the page. The ink pressed deep, as if she had wanted every word to stay forever. Wesley stared at the paper, but the words swam. His chest felt hollow, like something important had been scooped out and left behind. He did not cry, not yet. He did not fully understand what had just happened, only that something about him had made people laugh, something about his shoes, his skin, his presence. He replayed the moment again and again, trying to locate the exact point where he had done something wrong. Had he spoken too quietly, too politely? Had he stood in the wrong place? Had he walked in too confidently for someone who looked like him? His face burned with embarrassment, a hot, crawling shame that climbed up his neck and into his ears. He wished he could disappear into the stone beneath him, become part of the bench, become invisible enough to stop being noticed. Inside the bank, a new customer stepped up to the counter and was greeted warmly. Outside, Wesley flinched at the sound of the doors opening, then relaxed when no one came out for him. He folded the letter again, slower this time. His fingers trembled despite his effort to steady them. Grandma had always said his hands told the truth, even when his mouth stayed quiet. He pressed the envelope against his chest, right where his heart thumped too fast. He tried to remember her voice, the way she sounded on calm mornings in the kitchen, humming while the coffee brewed. He tried to remember how safe the world felt when she said his name. Now the world felt sharp. A car passed, tires crunching gravel. Someone laughed in the distance, not at him, but his shoulders still tensed as if it were. He glanced at the bank windows. Reflections stared back. Tall buildings, bright signs. No place for him. Wesley looked down at his shoes again. They had been fine this morning. At that moment, he did not know it yet, but the laughter inside the bank had already sealed someone else's fate. Bradley Whitmore liked to believe that order was something you enforced, not something you questioned. From inside his glass office, he watched the lobby the way a warden watched, confirming his authority. The walls were transparent on purpose. Visibility meant control. People behaved better when they knew they were being observed. At least, that was what Bradley told himself. He adjusted his cufflinks, silver with a subtle monogram, and glanced at his reflection in the polished surface of his desk. 45 years old, branch manager, 15 years in banking. He had earned this office, earned the respect that came with it. He believed that deeply. Outside his door, the bank hummed in neat, predictable patterns. Lines formed and dissolved. Money moved. Problems stayed contained. Bradley thrived on that rhythm. Chaos belonged outside these walls. Inside, there were rules. Chelsea Morrison leaned against the counter near the water cooler, holding a clipboard she did not really need. She laughed a little too loudly at something Bradley said, nodding along as if every word were a small gift. Senior teller, efficient, loyal. She understood what mattered here: image, alignment, knowing when to agree. Bradley sipped his coffee and smiled. This was how a professional environment worked, everyone in their place. He glanced at the lobby again and felt a small surge of satisfaction. He had handled the disruption cleanly, quickly. The system had worked exactly as designed. Identify a problem, remove it, restore calm. That was his job, keeping order. Money in Bradley's mind was not just currency. It was proof. Proof of discipline, proof of intelligence, proof of worth. People with money understood how the world worked. People without it usually did not. That belief had carried him far, and he saw no reason to question it now. If you followed procedure, you could not be wrong. If you respected the hierarchy would protect you. A voice cut through his thoughts. "Sir." Diane Campbell stood at the edge of the lobby, her handbag clutched tightly against her side. She had been a customer at this branch longer than Bradley had worked here. Reliable deposits, no trouble. The kind of client he usually liked. Her eyes met his through the glass. There was something unsettled in them. Not anger, not fear, discomfort. Bradley stepped out of his office with a practiced smile. "Everything all right, Ms. Campbell?" She hesitated. I wanted to say." She stopped, searching for words that did not seem to come easily. There was a pause, thick and awkward. Bradley waited, already impatient. "It just felt unnecessary," she finally said. "The way that was handled." Bradley's smile did not change, but something tightened behind it. "We follow strict protocols here," he replied smoothly, "for everyone's safety." Diane looked past him, toward the doors, toward the parking lot beyond. Her lips pressed together. "I see," she said quietly. She turned and walked away. Bradley dismissed the moment almost immediately. People got emotional, especially older clients. They did not always understand what it took to keep institutions running smoothly. Near the entrance, Jerome Davis stood at his post, tall, still, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. Bradley caught his eye. Jerome did not look away, but he did not nod either. There was no agreement in his face, no affirmation, just silence. Bradley felt a flicker of irritation and brushed it aside. Security followed orders. That was enough. He returned to his office and sat down, opening his email. Among the usual reports and internal memos was a message marked urgent. Investor visit, Q4 review, regional oversight. Bradley skimmed the subject line, then closed the window. Not now. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach, confident. The branch was calm again. The disruption had been dealt with. The system had done its job. Bradley Whitmore believed with absolute certainty that he was still in control, and that belief was about to cost him everything. Bradley Whitmore did not raise his voice at first. He did not need to. The lobby was already quiet enough for his words to travel. He stood near the main counter, hands resting lightly on the polished surface, posture relaxed. This was his stage. He had performed here for years. Wesley Brooks stood in front of him, the counter suddenly too high, the space too wide. The boy's shoulders were tense, his hands clasped together as if holding himself in one piece. He could feel the eyes on him now. Not just Bradley's, everyone's. Bradley tilted his head, studying him with open curiosity, the way someone might examine a stain they had just noticed. His gaze lingered on the shoes first, the cracked soles, the uneven laces. Then it moved up, slow and deliberate. "You want to check your account balance," Bradley said, repeating the words as if tasting them. His lips twitched. A ripple of quiet amusement passed through the lobby. Wesley swallowed. "Yes, sir." His voice was soft but steady. "My grandmother opened it for me." "Grandmother," Bradley echoed. He glanced around, making sure others were listening. There it was, the audience. He smiled wider now. "Of course, she did." A few people chuckled. Wesley's ears burned. His instinct screamed at him to turn around, to run back through the doors and never come back. His feet shifted, ready to move. Then he heard her voice in his head, calm, firm, unshakable. "Never let anyone make you feel small." He stayed where he was. Bradley leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to feel intimate and cruel at the same time. "Where did you get the card, son?" Wesley reached into his pocket with careful movements, as if sudden motion might make things worse. He placed the card on the counter. It slid a little, stopped near Bradley's hand. "My grandma gave it to me," Wesley said. "It has my name on it." Bradley picked it up with 2 fingers. His eyes flicked to the corner of the card. For a brief moment, something passed over his face. surprise, doubt. It vanished just as quickly. He held the card up so others could see it. A platinum card, he announced lightly. That got a reaction. Raised eyebrows, low murmurs. He laughed once, short and sharp. That is impressive. Someone near the back laughed with him. Bradley shook his head. Kid, I have been in banking a long time. I know what fraud looks like. The word hung in the air. Wesley felt it hit him like a slap. His chest tightened. I did not steal anything. Bradley placed the card back down, pushing it away from himself. Hard. It scraped against the counter, the sound loud in the silence. Here is what is going to happen, he said. His tone shifted, authoritative, certain. We are going to freeze this account until we figure out what is really going on. Wesley's breath caught. Freeze. The word felt cold and final. You cannot do that, he said, panic creeping into his voice despite his effort to stop it. That is my grandmother's money. Bradley straightened and turned slightly, making sure the lobby could hear him. Ladies and gentlemen, he said smoothly, I apologize for the delay. Unfortunately, we have to deal with situations like this from time to time. Situations. A woman near the counter shook her head. People these days, she muttered. Bradley continued, ignoring Wesley now, speaking over him. We take the security of our customers very seriously. That means we cannot allow suspicious activity. Suspicious, Wesley repeated quietly. His eyes burned, but he refused to cry. Bradley looked back at him, his expression firm. Jerome. The security guard's name landed like a sentence. Jerome Davis stepped forward slowly. His face was blank, his movements practiced. He did not look at Wesley. Escort him to the waiting area, Bradley said, and make sure he does not leave. Wesley's heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. He felt smaller than he ever had, standing there while strangers watched, judged, nodded along. This was not about an account anymore. This was about control. Bradley watched as Wesley was led away, his decision already made. In that moment, he believed he was protecting the bank. He did not realize he had just crossed a line he would never be able to step back over. The waiting area was not meant for waiting. It sat near the far wall, half hidden behind a decorative plant and a brochure stand that no one ever used. A narrow metal chair faced the lobby, angled just enough that anyone passing by could see who had been placed there. It was not private. It was not comfortable. It was visible. Bradley Whitmore knew exactly why that chair existed. Wesley sat down when Jerome gestured for him to. The chair was cold through his thin jeans. His feet dangled, toes barely brushing the floor. He kept his hands in his lap, fingers clenched so tightly they ached. Do not move, Bradley said from across the lobby. Do not talk to anyone. We will verify your story. Verify your story. The phrase echoed in Wesley's head. It made him sound like a liar before he had even been proven wrong. Chelsea Morrison leaned over the counter toward Bradley, her voice low but not low enough. Should I call the police? She asked. This looks like some kind of setup. Bradley waved a dismissive hand. Not yet. Let us see how far this goes. A man in a tailored suit laughed quietly behind them. Kids are getting bold these days, he said, trying their luck everywhere. Another chuckle followed, then another. Wesley stared at the floor, the pattern of the marble blurring together. His face felt hot. His throat felt tight. He tried to make himself smaller, to fold inward, to take up less space in a room that already seemed too large for him. He thought about standing up and walking out. He imagined the doors opening, the cold air hitting his face, the relief of being away from all these eyes. Then he remembered Grandma Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She had looked straight at him when she said it, like it was something important he needed to carry forever. Never let anyone make you feel small. Wesley lifted his head. Bradley was watching him again, arms crossed now, expression satisfied. This was working. The example was being made. You see, Bradley said loudly, addressing no one and everyone at once. Institutions like this rely on trust. When people abuse that trust, it hurts real customers. He glanced toward a man depositing a check. The man nodded approvingly. Wesley opened his mouth. My grandmother worked here. She saved everything.
Did you hear that?
Bradley cut him off with a raised hand. Enough. The word snapped through the air. You have said enough. He continued. Every story sounds convincing when you practice it long enough. That was the moment. The moment Bradley could have stopped. The moment he could have lowered his voice, taken the paper seriously, spoken to the boy like a human being. Instead, he chose the crowd. He turned slightly, projecting his voice toward the lobby. This is why we have procedures, to prevent people from taking advantage of the system. People, not a child, not a grieving grandson, just people. Jerome stood nearby, eyes fixed straight ahead. His jaw tightened. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, heavy and familiar. He had seen this before. Not exactly this, but close enough to recognize the shape of it. "Say something," a voice inside him urged. He did not. Wesley felt something settle in his chest. Not fear anymore, something harder, something quieter. If this was happening because of who they thought he was, then leaving would only prove them right. That was how it felt. Twisted, unfair, real. He stayed seated. Bradley picked up the phone on the counter, dialing with deliberate slowness. He wanted the boy to see it. He wanted everyone to see it. "Headquarters," he said. "Yes, I need to flag an account for investigation." He looked directly at Wesley as he spoke, held his gaze, made sure the message landed. "You are not going anywhere until we are done here." The line clicked. Bradley hung up and exhaled, satisfied. In that moment, he believed he had restored order. Wesley sat still, clutching the envelope tighter, his grandmother's letter pressed against his chest like armor. He did not know what would happen next, but the choice had already been made, and nothing after this would ever be the same. Jerome Davis did not touch Wesley's arm. He did not need to. The order had already done its work. Wesley stood up on his own slowly, the way people do when they know resistance will only make things worse. He held the brown envelope close to his chest, fingers curled tightly around it, as if letting go might cause something important to disappear forever. All eyes were on him now. Some stared openly, others pretended not to. A man near the counter leaned toward his companion and whispered something that made them both laugh. A woman lifted her phone just slightly, the screen angled toward the boy, subtle enough to feel deniable. Recording without responsibility, Wesley felt it immediately. The shift. He was no longer a customer. He was a suspect. Jerome walked a step behind him as they moved toward the exit, not guiding, not protecting, just close enough to make sure everyone understood what was happening. The message was clear, even if no one said it out loud. This is what we do with people like you. As they passed the main counter, Chelsea Morrison avoided Wesley's eyes. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, tapping keys that suddenly seemed very important. She did not look up. Silence, dressed up as professionalism. Bradley Whitmore watched from near his office, arms crossed, expression composed, order restored. He gave a small nod to himself. Wesley reached the glass doors. For a brief second, he hoped someone might speak. Anyone. A voice, a question, a protest. Nothing came. The doors slid open. Cold air rushed in. Jerome stopped just inside, the threshold between inside and out. This is where he was allowed to go. No further, no closer, no apology, no explanation. Wesley stepped outside alone. Behind him, the doors closed with a soft, mechanical sound, sealing the bank back into its polished calm. Inside, the line began to move again. A customer stepped forward, smiling. A teller returned the smile. The counting machines resumed their quiet rhythm. Life continued, uninterrupted. Jerome stood where he was, staring at the closed doors. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Older, tired, ashamed. He had seen the boy's face when the laughter started, had recognized it instantly. He had worn that same look once, years ago, in a different building, under different lights. He told himself he had no choice. The lie tasted bitter. Outside, Wesley walked a few steps away from the entrance before stopping. His legs felt weak, like they might give out if he kept going. He sat down on the stone bench near the parking lot, the cold seeping through his clothes. He stared at the bank. From the outside, it looked harmless, respectable, safe, a place people trusted with their futures. His phone buzzed in his lap. A message from Uncle Lawrence Brooks. In a meeting. Be there soon. Hang tight, champ. Wesley read it twice. Soon could mean anything. He typed back slowly. Okay. He did not mention what had happened, did not mention the laughter, did not mention the way people had looked at him like he was something dirty that needed to be removed. He did not want to worry his uncle. Across the parking lot, Diane Campbell stood near her car, keys in hand. She had seen Wesley come out, had watched him sit down alone. Her chest felt tight. The image would not let her go. She had heard the laughter too, had seen the phones, had felt the moment pass when she could have said something and chose not to. Now it was too late, or maybe it was not. She took a step back toward the entrance, then stopped again. Her reflection stared at her from the glass, asking a question she was not ready to answer. Inside, Jerome finally turned away from the doors. Outside, Wesley waited, and the weight of what had just happened began to settle over everyone who had chosen to do nothing. The minutes stretched in strange ways. Wesley did not know how long he had been sitting there. Time felt thicker now, slower, like it had weight. Cars rolled in and out of the parking lot. Doors opened, doors closed. People passed him without really seeing him. A woman in a tailored coat walked by, heels sharp against the pavement. She glanced at Wesley, then away, her grip tightening on her purse. A man laughed loudly into his phone as he headed toward the entrance, stepping around the bench as if it were an inconvenience. Someone else slowed down just enough to look, curiosity flickering across their face, then moved on. Wesley stared at the cracked screen of his phone. No new messages, no missed calls. He rested his elbows on his knees and leaned forward, suddenly exhausted. The envelope slid open slightly, and the corner of Grandma Eleanor's letter peeked out. He pulled it free, careful not to tear the paper. His hands shook again, weaker this time. He read the first line, then stopped. The words felt heavier out here, in the open air, with the bank looming behind him like a quiet accusation. He folded the letter back up and held it against his chest, breathing slowly, the way Grandma had taught him when things felt too big. Inside the bank, Jerome Davis tried to focus on his job. A delivery driver signed a clipboard. A customer asked for directions to the restroom. Jerome answered automatically, his voice steady, professional. No one would have guessed what was happening inside him. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted back to the glass doors. He saw the boy sitting there, alone, small, waiting. Jerome's stomach twisted. He could still hear Bradley's voice, calm, certain, final. He could still feel the moment he chose silence, the familiar weight of it pressing down on his shoulders. I have a mortgage, he told himself. Kids in college. I cannot afford trouble. The words sounded thinner each time he repeated them. Diane Campbell stood just inside the entrance now, pretending to look through her purse. She was buying time, working up courage. The scene replayed in her mind, sharper now that she was no longer surrounded by it. The laughter, the phones, the way the boy had stood there, trying not to cry. She had told herself it was not her place, that someone else would speak up, that it would resolve itself. It had not. She stepped closer to the doors, close enough to see Wesley clearly through the glass. He looked smaller out there, swallowed by the space around him. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. Behind her, the bank continued to operate as if nothing were wrong. A teller smiled, a printer whirred. Someone complained about the wait time. Bradley Whitmore emerged briefly from his office, scanning the lobby with a satisfied glance. His eyes flicked to the doors, then away. Problem solved. He had already moved on. Diane watched him disappear again, something hard settling in her chest. Outside, Wesley's phone buzzed. His heart jumped. He grabbed it too quickly. The screen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the stone near his feet. The crack deepened, spreading like a spider web. He stared at it for a second, then picked it up. Another message from Uncle Lawrence. Running late. 15 more minutes. Proud of you. Wesley swallowed. He typed back with careful fingers. Okay. He did not say anything else. He looked up at the bank one more time, then down at his shoes. The worn leather, the peeling tape, the things people had noticed first. He wondered if Grandma had ever felt this way, standing somewhere she did not belong, being judged before she spoke. The thought made his chest ache. Inside, Diane Campbell made a decision. She pushed the door open and stepped outside. Jerome saw her go. His breath caught. For a moment, he thought about following her, saying something, doing something. He stayed where he was. Outside, Diane approached the bench slowly, as if afraid of startling him. Wesley looked up, startled anyway. Hi, she said softly. Wesley nodded. Hi. She hesitated, then sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving space between them. I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. Wesley's fingers tightened around the envelope. She continued, her voice unsteady. It was wrong. And I am sorry I did not speak up sooner. Wesley did not know what to say. He had not expected anyone to come back. She glanced toward the bank, then back at him. Is someone coming for you? My uncle, Wesley said. He should be here soon. She nodded. Good. They sat in silence after that. Not awkward, not comfortable, just honest. Through the glass, Jerome watched them. Something inside him shifted, painful and necessary. The injustice was no longer contained inside the building. It was out here now, visible, undeniable, and it was only getting heavier. The black sedan pulled into the parking lot without drama. No music, no rush, just a quiet glide into place, as if it belonged there. The engine shut off, and for a moment, nothing happened. Wesley noticed it first. He lifted his head when the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a dark suit that fit without trying too hard. Silver threaded his hair at the temples. His posture was calm, grounded, the kind that made space around him feel smaller. Uncle Lawrence. Wesley stood so fast, the bench scraped softly against the stone. He hesitated for half a second, then moved forward. Lawrence crossed the distance in long strides and dropped to one knee in front of him, eyes level, hands gentle on Wesley's shoulders. Hey, champ, he said quietly. I am here. That was all it took. The tears came then, sudden and unstoppable. Wesley pressed his face into his uncle's jacket, the brown envelope crumpling slightly between them. Lawrence did not pull away. He held the boy as if there were nothing more important in the world, as if time itself could wait. Tell me what happened, Lawrence said when Wesley's breathing slowed. Wesley told him, not all at once, not neatly. Words tumbled out in pieces. The laughter, the card, the waiting chair, the way everyone watched, the way no one stopped it. Lawrence listened without interrupting. His face did not change much, but something darkened behind his eyes, slow and controlled. When Wesley finished, Lawrence nodded once. You did nothing wrong, he said. Not one thing. He stood and looked toward the bank. The glass reflected his face back at him, steady and unreadable. Come on, Lawrence said, extending his hand. Let us go inside. Wesley froze. His grip tightened on the envelope. I do not want to go back in there. Lawrence knelt again. I know, champ. I would not ask if it was not important. Sometimes the only way to take power away from a place is to walk back into it on your own terms. Wesley looked at the doors, then at his uncle. Okay, he whispered. Inside the bank, Bradley Whitmore was mid-sentence. When the doors slid open, he did not recognize Lawrence at first. Just another well-dressed man, another client. Then he saw the boy, Wesley. The room shifted. Bradley's stomach dropped as recognition settled in. The boy was holding the man's hand. Not clinging, holding. Lawrence stepped forward. His presence did not announce itself loudly, but it carried. Conversations trailed off. A teller stopped typing. Someone cleared their throat and then thought better of it. Is there a problem here? Lawrence asked calmly. Bradley straightened his tie on instinct. Sir, we are handling a situation. Handling, Lawrence repeated, his eyes moving around the lobby. Interesting word. Chelsea Morrison looked up then. Her face drained of color as her gaze flicked between Lawrence and Wesley. The pieces began to connect, slow and terrifying. Jerome Davis felt it too. The air changed. Something heavier than authority had just entered the room. Lawrence looked down at Wesley. This is the place, right? Wesley nodded. Lawrence turned back to Bradley. My nephew came here to check his account balance. The word nephew landed like a weight. Bradley opened his mouth, then closed it. His mind raced, searching for ground that was no longer there, and he was denied service. Lawrence continued, publicly. Silence spread through the lobby. Even the machines seemed to pause. Bradley forced a smile. If I had known who he was, he began. Lawrence did not raise his voice. That is exactly the problem. He stepped closer to the counter. I am Lawrence Brooks, CEO of Meridian Capital Holdings. The name hit the room like a sudden drop in temperature. Someone near the back sucked in a breath. Chelsea's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered against the marble. Bradley felt the floor tilt beneath him. Meridian Capital was not just an investor, it was the investor. And the laughter from earlier had nowhere left to hide. Bradley Whitmore felt his mouth go dry. Meridian Capital Holdings. The words echoed in his head, colliding with everything he thought he understood about control. He had read the reports, signed the summaries, praised the partnership in meetings. He knew exactly who Lawrence Brooks was. He just had not expected him to be standing there, holding the hand of the boy he had just humiliated. If I had known, Bradley said again, softer now, almost pleading. There must have been a misunderstanding. Lawrence did not respond right away. He looked around the lobby instead, at the faces that had laughed earlier, at the phones that were no longer raised, at the sudden stillness that had replaced confidence with fear. Then he looked back at Bradley. "That sentence you keep repeating," he said. "If I had known. It says more about you than you realize." Bradley swallowed. "We follow procedures. That is all I was doing." Lawrence nodded slightly. "Then let us look at the procedure." He turned to Chelsea. "Pull up the account." Chelsea hesitated, eyes flicking to Bradley. For the first time since this began, she did not know whose approval mattered more. "Do it," Bradley snapped, his voice cracking despite himself. Chelsea's fingers shook as she typed. The screen took longer than usual to load. Or maybe it just felt that way. Wesley stood beside his uncle, heart pounding. He could hear it in his ears. He held the envelope tighter, the paper crinkling softly. The account appeared. The number sat there in clean, emotionless font. $487,000. No one spoke. 40 years of saving. Every paycheck with a little set aside. Every sacrifice Grandma Eleanor had made without complaint. Bradley stared at the screen, his eyes wide. His breath came shallow now. If there had been that much money, he thought. If I had known. Lawrence saw the thought cross his face. "And there it is," Lawrence said quietly. "That look." He gestured toward the screen. "This is my mother's life. 40 years as a public school teacher. No luxury, no shortcuts, just discipline and love. She saved every dollar for this boy." He placed a hand on Wesley's shoulder. "And you looked at him and saw a problem." The lobby was silent. No one laughed. No one shifted. Even the man who had chuckled earlier stared at the floor. Chelsea felt sick. She remembered her own grandmother, remembered how small she looked near the end, how proud she had been of every little thing she managed to save. Bradley took a step back, his heel bumping the base of the counter. "I was protecting the bank," he said weakly. "You were protecting your assumptions," Lawrence replied. "And now the bank is exposed." He turned slightly, his voice still calm but sharper now. "This account is frozen without cause. A minor was publicly accused of fraud. A customer was denied service based on nothing but how he looked." Each word landed carefully. "That is not a misunderstanding. That is liability." Bradley's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say that would help him. Jerome Davis watched from his post, something tight in his chest finally snapping. He saw it now. The imbalance, the cost of silence, the way power had shifted the second someone who mattered had spoken. Diane Campbell stood near the entrance, her hand pressed against her mouth. She felt both relief and shame. Relief that someone had finally said what needed to be said. Shame that it had not been her. Lawrence looked down at Wesley again. "Your grandmother trusted this institution with everything she earned." He looked back at Bradley. "And today, you showed exactly how much that trust was worth to you." Bradley's shoulders slumped. The illusion cracked completely. He was no longer the man in control of the room. He was the problem standing in the middle of it. Somewhere behind the counter, a phone began to ring. No one answered it. The system had finally noticed what had happened, and it was starting to respond. Bradley Whitmore felt his mouth go dry. Meridian Capital. Holdings. The words echoed in his head, colliding with everything he thought he understood about control. He had read the reports, signed the summaries, praised the partnership in meetings. He knew exactly who Lawrence Brooks was. He just had not expected him to be standing there, holding the hand of the boy he had just humiliated. "If I had known," Bradley said again, softer now, almost pleading. There must have been a misunderstanding. Lawrence did not respond right away. He looked around the lobby instead, at the faces that had laughed earlier, at the phones that were no longer raised, at the sudden stillness that had replaced confidence with fear. Then he looked back at Bradley. "That sentence you keep repeating," he said. "If I had known. It says more about you than you realize." Bradley swallowed. "We follow procedures." "That is all I was doing." Lawrence nodded slightly. "Then let us look at the procedure." He turned to Chelsea. "Pull up the account." Chelsea hesitated, eyes flicking to Bradley. For the first time since this began, she did not know whose approval mattered more. "Do it," Bradley snapped, his voice cracking despite himself. Chelsea's fingers shook as she typed. The screen took longer than usual to load. Or maybe it just felt that way. Wesley stood beside his uncle, heart pounding. He could hear it in his ears. He held the envelope tighter, the paper crinkling softly. The account appeared. The number sat there in clean, emotionless font. $487,000. No one spoke. 40 years of saving. Every paycheck with a little set aside. Every sacrifice Grandma Eleanor had made without complaint. Bradley stared at the screen, his eyes wide. His breath came shallow now. If there had been that much money, he thought. If I had known. Lawrence saw the thought cross his face. And there it is. Lawrence said quietly. That look. He gestured toward the screen. This is my mother's life. 40 years as a public school teacher. No luxury, no shortcuts. Just discipline and love. She saved every dollar for this boy. He placed a hand on Wesley's shoulder, and you looked at him and saw a problem. The lobby was silent. No one laughed. No one shifted. Even the man who had chuckled earlier stared at the floor. Chelsea felt sick. She remembered her own grandmother, remembered how small she looked near the end, how proud she had been of every little thing she managed to save. Bradley took a step back, his heel bumping the base of the counter. I was protecting the bank, he said weakly. You were protecting your assumptions, Lawrence replied. And now the bank is exposed. He turned slightly, his voice still calm but sharper now. This account is frozen without cause. A minor was publicly accused of fraud. A customer was denied service based on nothing but how he looked. Each word landed carefully. That is not a misunderstanding. That is liability. Bradley's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say that would help him. Jerome Davis watched from his post, something tight in his chest finally snapping. He saw it now. The imbalance. The cost of silence. The way power had shifted the second someone who mattered had spoken. Diane Campbell stood near the entrance, her hand pressed against her mouth. She felt both relief and shame. Relief that someone had finally said what needed to be said. Shame that it had not been her. Lawrence looked down at Wesley again. Your grandmother trusted this institution with everything she earned. He looked back at Bradley. And today, you showed exactly how much that trust was worth to you. Bradley's shoulders slumped. The illusion cracked completely. He was no longer the man in control of the room. He was the problem standing in the middle of it. Somewhere behind the counter, a phone began to ring. No one answered it. The system had finally noticed what had happened, and it was starting to respond. Lawrence Brooks did not raise his voice. That was what unsettled Bradley Whitmore the most. Anger, Bradley understood. Complaints, lawsuits, shouting customers. He had handled those for years. They followed patterns. They burned hot and burned out. This was different. Lawrence stood still at the center of the lobby, one hand resting lightly on Wesley's shoulder. His voice, when he spoke again, was calm enough to feel almost gentle. Before we go any further, Lawrence said, I want to ask you a question, Mr. Whitmore. Bradley nodded quickly. Of course. If I had not walked through those doors today, Lawrence continued, what would have happened to my nephew? The question landed softly. No accusation, no threat, just a question. Bradley opened his mouth on instinct. The answer formed automatically in his mind. The truth, unfiltered and uncomfortable. He would have been escorted out. The account frozen. The complaint buried. The day forgotten. Bradley swallowed. We would have completed our review, he said carefully. Lawrence tilted his head. And then Bradley hesitated. His silence stretched too long. And then what? Lawrence asked again. The lobby felt smaller now. Closer. Like the walls were listening. Bradley's eyes flicked briefly to Wesley. The boy stood quietly, watching him, not angry, not defiant, just present. Bradley looked away. Lawrence nodded once as if the silence had answered him. That is the twist, Lawrence said, his voice carrying through the room. Not the money, not the balance, but this. If I was not here, nothing about today would change for you. It would change everything for him. He gestured lightly toward Wesley. That truth settled heavily over the room. Jerome Davis felt it like a punch to the chest. He imagined the boy leaving alone, going home confused, ashamed, carrying a story no one else would ever hear. He imagined himself going back to work the next day like nothing had happened. The image made his stomach turn. Lawrence turned back to Bradley. You call it procedure. You call it policy. But let us be honest about what happened here. He stepped closer, his voice still even. You saw a child who did not match your idea of a real customer. You decided he was a risk before he ever spoke. The process did not lead you there. Your assumptions did. Bradley shook his head weakly. That is not true. Then explain this, Lawrence said. If Wesley had been wearing a blazer instead of worn shoes, if his skin were lighter, if his voice sounded different, would he have been laughed at? Bradley did not answer. Because you know the answer, Lawrence continued. And so does everyone else in this room. Chelsea Morrison stared at the floor, her face flushed with shame. She thought about how quickly she had assumed the worst, how easy it had been to join in, to hide behind authority. Diane Campbell stepped forward from near the entrance. Her voice shook, but it did not break. He was polite, she said. The boy. He did nothing wrong. I saw it. All heads turned toward her. I watched it happen, Diane continued. The laughter, the way he was spoken to. And I did nothing. That is on me. But what was done to him was wrong. Bradley looked at her, stunned. Jerome felt something inside him finally give way. He took a step forward as well. She is right, he said quietly, his voice surprised even himself. I was there the whole time. The words hung in the air. I told myself I was just doing my job, Jerome continued. But standing there and saying nothing does not make you neutral. It makes you part of it. Lawrence watched them both, his expression unreadable. This is what systems rely on, he said. Not just bad actors, but silence. People who convince themselves that following orders absolves them of responsibility. He looked back at Bradley one last time. You did not just fail a child today, you proved something far worse. Bradley's voice came out hoarse. What? That your respect has conditions, Lawrence said, and dignity does not. The room was utterly still now. No laughter, no whispers, no phones, only the sound of people realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the real imbalance had never been about money at all. Lawrence let the silence do its work. It stretched longer than Bradley Whitmore could tolerate. He shifted his weight, straightened his tie out of habit, then realized how meaningless the gesture was now. The room was no longer responding to him. Authority had moved elsewhere. You keep talking about procedure, Lawrence said at last, about policy, about protecting the institution. He paused, then asked quietly, who was protecting the child? No one answered. Wesley stood very still beside his uncle. He was listening, not just to the words, but to the way the room had changed. Earlier, every sound had pressed down on him. Now the quiet felt different. Heavy, yes, but focused. Like attention finally pointed in the right direction. Lawrence turned to him briefly. You did exactly what you were supposed to do today, he said. You showed up. You told the truth. You stayed standing. Wesley nodded, unsure what to say. His chest felt tight, but not with fear. Something else was there now, something steadier. Lawrence faced the room again. If I were not here, he said, this would have ended very differently. A report would be filed, an account frozen, a child sent home with questions he would carry for years. That is the version of this story your system produces every day. Bradley shook his head, desperation creeping into his voice. We cannot be responsible for every feeling. Lawrence did not flinch. This is not about feelings. It is about harm. He gestured toward Wesley. Harm does not always leave bruises. Sometimes it teaches a child where he does not belong. That landed. Diane closed her eyes for a brief moment. She thought of all the times she had told herself it was not her place, of how safe that excuse had felt until now. I want to file a statement, she said suddenly. Her voice was stronger this time. As a witness. Bradley turned toward her. You do not need to do that. Yes, I do, Diane replied. I should have spoken earlier. I will not stay quiet again. Jerome felt his heart pounding in his ears. He had already spoken once. The fear was still there, buzzing under his skin, but it was different now, smaller. I will file one too, he said, and I will tell the truth. Bradley stared at him. Jerome. Jerome met his gaze. I watched a child be humiliated today, and I did nothing until now. That ends here. Something in Bradley's face collapsed. Not anger, not outrage, recognition. The realization that the ground beneath him was no longer solid. Chelsea Morrison finally looked up. Tears stood in her eyes. I thought I was just following orders, she said quietly. I did not think about who it hurt. Lawrence nodded once. That is how it works. People do not wake up planning to be cruel. They just decide not to interrupt it. He looked around the lobby one last time. The customers, the staff, the bystanders. The twist in this story, he said, is not that a boy had money. It is that he needed power behind him to be treated like a human being. No one argued. Bradley's shoulders slumped. He looked smaller now, stripped of the confidence that had carried him through the day. The illusion he had lived inside of was gone. Lawrence took Wesley's hand again. He squeezed it gently. "Remember this, champ. You were worthy of respect long before I walked through that door." Wesley felt the words settle deep inside him, deeper than the shame, deeper than the fear. Around them, the system was waking up, not fully, not cleanly, but enough to be seen. And everyone in that room understood something they could not unlearn. Human value had never lived in the numbers on a screen. It had been standing there all along. The consequences did not arrive with sirens or shouting. They arrived quietly, the way real consequences often do. Bradley Whitmore sat alone in his glass office long after the lobby had emptied. The lights were dim now, the reflections in the walls softer, less forgiving. His phone rested face down on the desk, vibrating every few minutes with messages he did not want to read. When the call finally came, it was brief. Administrative leave, effective immediately. No argument, no appeal, just procedure, delivered with the same calm tone he had used on others for years. Bradley nodded as if the person on the other end could see him. When the line went dead, he stayed seated, staring at the place on his desk where his nameplate used to feel important. Suspension became termination within days. There was no dramatic announcement, no chance to explain himself to the staff. His access badge stopped working. His email was deactivated. 15 years of authority disappeared behind locked doors and corporate language. People who once laughed at his jokes stopped returning his calls. He cleared out his office under supervision, placing framed awards and expensive pens into a cardboard box that felt far too small for the life he thought he had built. As he walked through the lobby one last time, no one met his eyes. There was no laughter. Chelsea Morrison felt the fallout differently. She was not fired, but the reprimand was formal and permanent. Mandatory training, written warnings, a note in her professional file that would follow her wherever she went. She sat through meetings where no one raised their voice, where disappointment was delivered politely and precisely. Each word carried weight. You failed to intervene. You reinforced inappropriate behavior. You prioritized alignment over integrity. Chelsea nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, knowing there was no defense that did not sound hollow. The worst part was not the punishment. It was the realization that she had earned it. She still came to work, still smiled at customers, but the ease was gone. Every interaction reminded her of the moment she chose silence and how easy it had been. That stain did not wash off. Jerome Davis stood at the entrance again the following week. Same uniform, same posture. But something had shifted. A young woman approached the counter, her voice hesitant, her hands shaking as she explained a problem with her account. The teller sighed impatiently, speaking faster, louder, frustration rising. Jerome felt the old instinct surface. Stay quiet. Do your job. Do not get involved. He thought of Wesley. He stepped forward. She is asking for help, Jerome said calmly. Give her a minute. The teller looked surprised, then embarrassed. She slowed down, apologized, tried again. The woman exhaled, relief flooding her face. Jerome stepped back to his post, heart racing. Nothing dramatic had happened. No applause, no recognition, but he felt lighter than he had in years. Inside the system, small adjustments were being made. Reports filed, policies reviewed, oversight tightened. The institution responded the only way it knew how, carefully, quietly, protecting itself. Outside of it, something else lingered. Bradley Whitmore lost his position, his reputation, his sense of control. Chelsea Morrison carried the weight of knowing she had failed when it mattered. Jerome Davis learned that silence had a cost he was no longer willing to pay. No one had been hit. No one had bled. And yet, everything had changed. The price had been paid. And no one was laughing anymore. Time did what it always does. It moved forward, quietly, without asking anyone's permission. Years later, Wesley Brooks stood in a small apartment flooded with late afternoon light. The walls were bare, except for a single-framed photograph on the desk. Grandma Eleanor Brooks, smiling softly, her eyes warm and knowing, as if she could still see everything unfolding. Wesley was grown now, not rich in the way people like to measure, but steady, grounded, the kind of man who listened before he spoke, the kind who noticed when someone else was being overlooked. In his wallet, tucked behind his ID, was a folded piece of paper, laminated at the edges from years of careful handling. Grandma Eleanor's letter, the same words that had carried him through childhood, through confusion, through that day at the bank he would never forget. In the corner of his closet sat a pair of old sneakers. The soles were cracked, the laces frayed, the leather worn thin from years of use. He had never thrown them away, never even considered it. They were not reminders of shame. They were reminders of truth. People had laughed at those shoes once, measured his worth by how they looked. They had been wrong. But the damage had not come from the laughter alone. It had come from the silence around it. The Eleanor Brooks Scholarship had been announced quietly at first. No grand ceremony, no press release designed for applause. Just an opportunity. Every year, students from underserved communities receive support to pursue education, not as charity, but as investment. Teachers, counselors, social workers, people who would stand where others once stayed silent. Wesley served on the advisory board now. He never told applicants his story. He did not need to. He could see it in their eyes, the same mix of hope and caution, the same question they were afraid to ask. Do I belong here? He made sure they knew the answer. Yes. Across the city, people who had been in that bank carried the day differently. Some remembered it as a scandal, others as a lesson. A few tried to forget it altogether. But the echo remained, because some moments do not fade. They settle. They shape who we become. Wesley picked up the old sneakers one last time and placed them back carefully. He looked at his grandmother's photo and smiled. She had been right. Respect was never something you earned by looking the part. It was not a reward for money, power, or proximity to the right people. Respect was the baseline, the minimum. As he turned off the light and stepped into the evening, the question lingered, quiet but unavoidable. If you had been there that day, standing in that lobby, watching a child be humiliated, who would you have been? The one who laughed, the one who filmed, the one who stayed silent, or the one who spoke up? Some echoes never fade. We grow into them.